All right, so one thing I'll be adding at the end of class, just as a notice of where you can find it. Barrage has let us know that, yes, Friday there is an event that those who are interested can attend at as part of the Florida Mindfulness community. There is an ongoing thread where if you have, and I'll go ahead and add the event for Florida Mindfulness community, but if you want to invite other students to come and check something out, or if you know of an event that's taking place with any of the different religious, spiritual, sacred groups in the region, please feel free to post it to invite people. It is about opening our ideas, opening our mind to understanding how religion, how the sacred is understood. So I will be adding that today. All right, so the main question I have.
How do we prove to you that we went to those things? How do you want us to?
All right, so to prove you went, in that same section where you click on discussions, once this decides to actually show up on the screen again. There we go. You'll see, for instance, tribal, indigenous, or Hinduism, or for Florida Mindfulness community, this will be, if you do the event this Friday, it would fall under Buddhism. And what you do is you just post about your experience. I am assuming you went based on you sharing that you went and telling me what you learned. Could a student lie and make something up? Yes, but that's on you. I can't. Just as an example, for instance, I did post, a little bit about the powwow and a couple links to it. And that way you can see that. All right, how many of you, hopefully everyone, watch the rest of the Gagaji video? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, at least half. Good. Those who did not, please try and make sure you watch through it. The quiz for tribal religions is going to be very easy at this point, simply because your textbook addresses a number of different groups. We'll talk about a number of groups, but because of that, we're going to see there aren't really key terms that go through everything. When we get to the next time in the semester after the midpoint, when we come back and revisit tribal religions, I will expect you to have watched the videos, read the books, and be much better prepared for deeper discussions beyond what we discussed today. So the first thing I want to go through, though, and I usually do this as a group activity, but this semester we're going to do it just as a class, is the question of oral culture versus written culture. Because tribal religions still to this day tend to be more orally based than written. You have groups that only in the last decade have began to write down their sacred stories. You have groups that still try to focus on an oral culture. So there are benefits and problems to orality, and there are benefits and problems to written culture. We can categorize these into 3 sections: community, alive memory, and a sense of change or the lack of change. So first we're going to look at the sense of community, because for tribal religions, many groups, their community is just that. It is who they are. It is what defines them. So, for an oral culture, why is being orally based good for the community?
Because in order to learn about it, you have to talk to each other.
You have to be there. If you want to know your grandparents' recipe for barbecue pork, you have to go there. It's never going to be written down. If you want to know the story behind the jingle dance, the meaning, you have to go there and listen. You have to be there. By being present, what does that do for the community? What does it do? You have to physically be there, which means you are making the community.
Making friends, socialize,
You're socializing.
sharing new knowledge, sharing all those tales, news, gossiping.
You're having a shared experience. You are binding that community together into having a shared experience. So oral culture tends to make the community stronger. It tends to enforce or reinforce the relationships between people, to help define who they are, bring strength to the community. This is true of any oral culture, and it's true of any community, that when people have to physically be there, the group tends to get close-knit. All right, so if we think about the Gagaju, they were an oral culture. What has been a problem in relationship to community, though?
Drama, politics,
Right? What else?
fighting.
Only the initiated is allowed to know about certain things.
Right. Is there still a Gagaju community?
Somewhat.
What is garbage?
Because nobody, there are the people in the video you were required to watch.
Oh,
So
yeah.
if you did not watch it, you need to go and watch it.
That's
See,
right.
that's the important thing. If you prepare before class, you'll be better able to participate. Online students get that little benefit of having discussions, group discussions, where they can go back and forth and go back and watch something if they missed it. In class, you really have to be prepared coming in. Just a little note for future reference. All right, so the Gagaju have essentially died out. That video that you watched was made in 1988. Every single one of those elders has passed away. The last elder to pass away was Big Bill Naiji. He actually allowed for a complete recording of all of the ceremonies of his death, which has given the anthropological world a wonderful amount of information that now, if it weren't for that being written down, would be completely lost. Oral communities have a community because you're required to be there. But when there are no people physically coming, all of a sudden you have no community. You don't have something written down. The students or the kids who are taken away to other places, they never learn because nothing was written down that they could take. They could no longer physically go to their ancestors. They no longer gathered. And so now there's no community left. Had they written their stories down, they could have grown the community. How do we learn about many different religions? How is it that we learn about Ifa divination? Because it's written down in our textbooks, in stories. Had that information not been written down, we wouldn't know about it. Because it's written down now, people all around the world can gain access. We can learn about these traditions from all around the world. We can learn who the Bori,
Boring?
that's from your textbook, B-O-R-I, who the Bori are, who the Tsar are, spirits. Yeah, you have to read.
I'm studying calculus.
So the thing is, though, it's written down so we know it. We can get followers on our Facebook community from people all around the world, even if they never see us, even if they've never visited us. They can join our community. Our community can grow. This is great. What is the problem now? What's lost? You can grow your community all over the world. It's written down. What are two problems? Or what is a big problem?
Might not feel as sacred anymore.
You're not socializing. If you're not socializing, do you really have a tight-knit community? No. You think you do.
What about the
Our group on Facebook has 100,000 members and our posts get 1 million likes. That means we're a beautiful, tight, good, wonderful community. But if something is needed in that community, oh, these are just people who like and read our things. They're not actually engaged. They're not actually an active part of the community. They're not socializing in person.
So, I mean, even though we have books, but we can't experience stuff like in the community, culture. We can read about it.
But it's
So
not
nowadays,
real.
Like we always like on social media, but we are not hanging out together. Like no experience. And, oh, we are busy on social media. That's it.
Yeah.
And due to that, stress, anxiety, depression, loneliness, all those stuff are growing.
We're part of a community, but we're also all alone. All right, so another part of understanding things is whether something is able to be remembered and passed on, how it becomes part of who we are. If it is alive. By alive, I mean it engages our senses. By memory, I'm talking about improving or helping our memory. So, oral culture. How does oral culture benefit memory? How does it give us a sense of aliveness?
Like we talked about before, like you have to be there, so it's part of the experience that you can remember.
It's experiential. And it's experiential in that for storytelling, there's a few components that were almost always present when it's a sacred myth or story. One, and I didn't bring the drum today, but there's a drum beat. Why is there a drum beat? Why do drums help memory?
Association.
Association? Rhythm. When you learn the alphabet, when you learn the periodic table of elements, when you learn any grouping of things from the planets to the kings of England, if you put it to song, if you put it to a rhythm, you're going to learn it better. Psychologists have found this in so many studies. The more engaged we are, the more we activate our senses. So oral cultures, everyone was physically together. There's a drum. There's usually dancing. There's theater along with the storytelling. It's not just somebody speaking and people listening. There's usually smells. Even in the telling in families. You can walk by, a few months ago, you probably walked by 100 different things that smelled like pumpkin spice. Or 1,000 different things, depending on where you went. It's like, okay, I'm sick and tired of the smell maybe. But then every so often you walk by a place. And there was something different about that smell. In fact, that smell took you back to being a kid, waiting for your aunt, your mom, your dad, somebody to pull that fresh pumpkin pie out of the stove. It was just that right combination of flavors. Now, not only do you remember that, all of a sudden you remember some of the wisdom that this person told you when you were a kid. That's the power of oral culture, is in that experiential learning. Engaging all of our senses. That allows us to remember things. But there's a problem. What do you think it is?
It's only there if people remember.
It's only there as long as there are people to experience it. Good. So when there are no people to have part of that experience. Anyone ever play the phone game? I tell someone something, and by the time it gets over to somebody else, the story's changed. So we have that part, and we'll bring that up again, but it means that we might not be remembering the right things. So we'll bring that example with exchange, but what is remembered might not be correct. Because part of experiential learning is also the tone. There is a story about Jumping Mouse. Tiny little mouse. And Jumping Mouse one time hears about this thing called a mountain. Wants to discover it. So goes on this adventure, meets all these different things, meets a frog, meets a wolf, meets a bison, meets all these different creatures, and eventually finds what mountain is. Thing is, you could tell that story a couple different ways. And depending on how that story is told, what gets remembered might change. What is the benefit of written culture? Access to the materials. It stays around. If we want to know what Injuandrua said about the frilled wizard, all we have to do is look it up in our book. Because our sacred text tells us. So we no longer have to memorize this information. We can just read it. But is there a problem?
Difference of interpretation.
Misinterpret what it says? We don't actually learn the material. We learn how to get it. Maybe. We can access it. You want to know anything, you can access it on your phones. If she wants to share with us what she's accessing, she can tell us all these different things that she's finding on her phone. Anyone can gain that knowledge, which means it can be misinterpreted. It also means we don't actually learn it. We don't actually memorize it. If we do, we only learn it. We'll memorize it for those few weeks during that class that we took at some point in life. There's a reason third and fifth graders are smarter than adults and even smarter than the 12th graders in those competition TV show, because at third and fifth grade, they tend to actually still be learning some of the material. By high school, you're just finding it online for the most part. You don't actually have to learn. You don't have to learn. We'll come back to a notion of this when we get to this next subject. So for oral culture, do you think that tends to promote the ability of change or prevent change? Tends to promote change. All right, so why is that change good? Why is it good that in oral culture we can change the words, change the stories?
Fit different audiences.
Well, my kid's really not good at making friends with people who are different than him. So when I tell the story of Jumping Mouse, I stress how Jumping Mouse became friends with the frog and friends with the bison and friends with all these different things. Oh, but you see, my other kid, she's just afraid to take risks. She'll make friends with anyone, but she's not going to take a risk. She's not going to go outside or do anything that's not commonly accepted. So for her, I might stress how Jumping Mouse was willing to leave the hole and go to these other places. Risk going across the river. I can change the story to fit the needs of the person hearing it, even if it's generally the same story. If our tribe moves from the base of Mount Rainier down to Key West, I can change it to say that rather than having to fight with a bear, you have to fight with a gator. Rather than having to brave a blizzard, you have to survive a hurricane. I can change it to fit the needs, to fit knowledge and understanding. How is that ease of change a problem?
Because if you change it too much, they might take it a different way and create something completely different.
It's now a new or a different story. We no longer know what the original story is. It's been changed so many times. There are so many different versions of the little people. A belief of the Cherokee, that there are these little people, beings that live in different places, like around waterfalls and in valleys. Some stories, they're good people. Some stories, they're bad people. A whole range of different things. Who were they? Whether they were children or whether they were little people or something else, who knows? There's so many versions. We don't know what the original version is. Oftentimes with oral culture, this is true whether we're looking at tribal religions, if we're looking at the early parts of Hinduism. Did it come from the Harappa civilization? Did it come from the Aryan civilization? We don't know. Both groups seem to have had oral stories, but they have so many variations, we don't know which one was the original. What was the purpose when Robert Frost was writing those words, two roads diverged in wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that made all the difference? Well, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Was it a good difference or a bad difference? Unless you have the author there to tell you, you don't know. Not 100%. So we lose the original meaning when that change is readily accepted. So with written culture, we could say there tends to be a lack of change. So how is a lack of change good? How does it benefit?
Everybody reads the same story.
We have the same story. I'm not sure what this meant. Well, I can go to the book and I can find out. It's not going to change based on the whims of some leader or some person. What's written is written, and that's it. Because it's written, I can get a hold of it. So if I really want to know what the Sea Org, upper echelons of Scientology think, even though it's super, super secret, you can go to Planet, you can go to any number of websites and find that out. You want to know what it takes to be a third-degree Gardnerian witch? Oh, it's not really that secret. You can find it anywhere. And it's written down, and it's the same story. It hasn't changed. But what is the problem with that?
No adaptation.
No adaptation, which ends up leading back to the same problem as being memory. Can be misinterpreted. Since Rain watched the video, I'm going to use it as an example. If I come up to you as a kid and I'm like, but you told me that the if I mess up the ritual, I'll get turned into a filled lizard, and the book tells me that I'll get turned into a filled lizard if I mess up the ritual. But Johnny messed up the ritual, and he's not a filled lizard. How am I supposed to believe anything in this book? What's the problem?
I wouldn't know what to say to that.
Yeah, we don't know what to say to it.
He'll turn into a lizard eventually.
In science class, I learned this, and in our textbook it says, or in our sacred text it says that. How do I believe anything this sacred text says? Because I don't think anyone can just turn into a gator because they're on fire. Well, we can't change or adapt the story because it's written down. It's sacred. It's the words of Njuanjwa. It's the words of Wankantanka. It's the words of insert religious figure, deity. So now all of a sudden we have to say, well, this portion of the story, we take this symbolically. It's a metaphor. This other portion, this is the part we take literally. all of a sudden you are required to go back to oral culture to actually have an understanding of what the words mean for your particular community. So that when one group reads certain sacred text, it means one thing, but then another group will take those same exact words and interpret it differently because they're trying to adapt to their community. In the end, both oral culture and written culture have benefits. They have amazing benefits because if the Gagajew had had more of a written culture, we'd know more about their sacred stories. The Cherokee at times have to rely on translations from James Mooney as to what some of the sacred stories are because James Mooney wrote down a lot. But then we're dealing with that translation issue that we talked about with language. There are groups in Africa where the stories aren't written down. Groups that are just in the last year have diminished tremendously. If there's no written culture, we don't know. But then when it gets written down, living in another country, maybe the words that were used to write it down, it says burn a fag. I don't think they meant to actually burn a person. I think they're talking about a cigarette here. So we still have to understand what the words mean. And because we're not part of that culture, we don't necessarily know exactly how those words can be interpreted. Or whether they're to be taken literally or figuratively. It's a metaphor. No, this really just happened. You really will turn into a food lizard if you mess up. All these different ideas. So, written culture, oral culture, tribal religions face the challenge of figuring out what to do because some of their sacred stories are so sacred they don't want them written down. They don't want them recorded. In your textbook, it talks about the Sundance. It is not allowed to record the actual Sundance. And no, they do not do example Sundances at powwows or other events because it is that sacred of an event. The couple of video clips you can find on YouTube are either mocked editions. There's two guys from the 70s who made a bunch of videos and they we'll come back to that idea. They were not doing things appropriately. The setup for the Sundance, you can find plenty of videos. But the reason being is one, it's sacred to them. So it will not be written there. But number two, the fear of misinterpretation. Because when you read about the Maasai warriors with circumcision at around age 14, did that seem a little strange? A little odd? A little wrong? Well, in the Sundance, people take hooks that go through the skin and they hang backwards on these hooks. Don't worry, they don't actually bleed, or very rarely. They don't actually pierce the skin. There's similar events. More often than not, many tribes, like in Asia, you'll find groups that do, people will hang from hooks, but it's usually in the back. But the Sundance, the hooks are in the front. If people saw that, might misinterpret it. So for some tribal groups, there's a fear that if they write things down, if they allow recordings, people are going to misinterpret, misunderstand, and judge them unfairly. So it's always that question of what gets written down, because once something's written down, somebody can get a hold of it. Today, it doesn't matter, even if it's pen and pencil. Somebody can take a picture and post it, and if it gets posted somewhere, it's everywhere. So it's that question of what you do or do not share. What will be remembered or not. All right, so moving on from this idea, tribal religions, we've mentioned the challenge a little bit last class. So let's start with trying to ask a question. What do you think the worldview is of tribal religions. Whether we're looking at tribal America, tribal Africa, the Gagaju are a great example to use as we go through this today. How do you think they see the world? Are they one with it? Are they above it?
So this tribe religion is just one religion, right?
No, tribal religions is hundreds of religions, which makes it hard and challenging to answer
So
these
we are saying
questions.
that one.
Can we summarize or pick a few things that describe how they see the world?
Tribe.
Animated by spirits, perhaps? Every place sacred in some form, in some fashion? The importance of the spirits of the dead, whether those spirits become part of this earth or go to a heavenly realm. The importance perhaps of speaking of those spirits. Maybe the importance of understanding the relation humans have with animals, with nature. Earth, teach me to remember that I might live in peace, that I might understand birds, the roles of life. Example, and this in part goes with, this is just a basic pipe I brought in, but if you think about what I talked about with the flute I brought in on Tuesday, every object in the world has a spirit. That spirit is walking. Everything has spirit in most tribal traditions. Native America, you see this emphasized in the spirits of all beings and animals, for instance. In tribal Africa, you see not just that, but you especially see the importance of the spirits of those who are deceased. Spirits such as the Bori, such as the Tsar. All right, so thus the spirits of the tree are things of that kind. While not like the spirit of man, are also walking. Walking comes from walking beings. These beings are greater than mankind. The most powerful is Nagitanka, the great spirit, who signifies the blue sky, the world. What about ultimate powers? Anyone know who Oshun is? It's okay. Make sure you read before we get to the next time we cover tribal religions. Make sure you know about some of these African deities of the Yoruba. The Yoruba story is amazing. It's actually a good portion of it is even in your workbook. So a couple of examples of how to understand an ultimate power. The world was created by one God who is at the same time both male and female. This creator is neither Mavu or Lisa, but is named Nana Buluku. In time, Nana Buluku gave birth to twins who were named Mavu and Lisa, and to whom eventually dominion over the real was ceded. To Mavu, the woman was given command of the night. To Lisa, the man, command of the day. Mavu, therefore, is the moon and inhabits the west, while Lisa, who is the sun, inhabits the east. At the time their respective domains were assigned to them, no children had yet been born. Though at night the man was in the habit of giving a rendezvous to the woman, and eventually she bore him offspring. This is why when there is an eclipse of the moon, such as the other night, it is said that the celestial couple are engaged in lovemaking. When there's an eclipse of the sun, Mavu is believed to be having intercourse with Lisa. This idea of sex or procreation being part of the creation story shows up in numerous tribal religions. Many, not all, but many of the religions of Africa emphasize the importance of two figures, often twins, but not always, that represent a balance between male and female. There's an extreme importance placed in most African tribes on this balance between male and female, and how if one is not appreciated, there will be problems. That's part of the story in Yoruba. One reason so much chaos comes to earth was because man was neglecting the importance of women. And so even among the Orishas, even among these spirits, they were forgetting about the importance of women. And so they have to go up and learn that if they don't appreciate her, then that chaos will continue. But if they see that there's a balance between the two, then society, then life will unfold properly. Dogon tribe, there's a man in every woman and a woman in every man. Women are the pillars of the world. A complete person is one who can nurture both sides. Another perspective of the ultimate brings in more of this almost transcendental trait. In the beginning was God. Today is God. Tomorrow will be God. Who can make an image of God? He has no body. He has a word that comes from the mouth. That word, it is no more. It is past. And still it lives. So is God. So it's more of this almost what we might call philosophical, this look at seeing the greatness or how impossible it is to describe that which is infinite, that which is beyond an image. Because oftentimes when we think about religion, we think about the Western religions that have depictions of what God is or what God looks like. For tribal religions, as well as Hinduism, and even other religions, but especially Hinduism and tribal religions, we see this notion that you can't fully understand what the ultimate power looks like. It's sort of like it's a connection of everything, so pantheistic or monistic traits, but then there's all these different deities or spirits that make us kind of want to say polytheism. But then we see the importance of animals, and we might add in some animism, or the importance of the spirits and the ancestors, so the ancestrism. It's hard to choose one classification. Because even within a single tribe, even within just looking at the Yoruba or just looking at the Lasu, there's a notion of everything interconnected. There's a notion of a high deity and a theistic. But then there's all these spirits, all these different beings. For the Gagaju, in Juanjua, the creator deity. But while Injuanjua is the creator deity, what created the rock places? What creature? The alligator. And the snakes. Making the different bridges. Alright, so the Yoruba story is there for you to learn a bit more there. By the time we get through the midterm, I want to know that you've read and learned a couple of these creation stories because they're very interesting to read and see how the Iroquois, the idea that people came up from the ground, almost as if they sprouted. The Hopi tradition also sees that there's a mixture of creations. In one story of the Hopi, you have the idea, similar to the Yoruba, where a deity made these figures out of clay. And then from the clay, something was added, either cornmeal, water, and they became human. So that's one part of the creation story for the Hopi. But the Hopi also believe that the world has evolved and de-evolved numerous times, and there have been multiple worlds. And at the end of each world, usually some animal saves mankind. So for instance, the spiders built a cocoon around humans so that they could survive one of the great plagues and re-emerge up out of the ground. So it's neat, these creation stories. All right, rituals. So we've already talked a little bit about how rituals tend to be based on the different seasons. During the season of migrating birds is when the Gagaju do what? During the season of migrating birds is when the Gagaju would do what? What ritual? The cleansing, the burning of the grasslands. Again, you have the idea of Ifa, divination, trying to understand what the deities have to say. It's really interesting. You can look up Ifa divination on YouTube and see all these different versions because Ifa divination is more of an oral tradition. And so there's a lot of variations about what the different symbols mean when the palm nuts hit the ground. There's roughly 380 official meanings, but over 1,000 variations. A little bit more than you get from a tarot deck. A lot more. All right, so other examples. So I mentioned the sun dance. One thing about rituals and practices is when one does a ritual, they are recreating the creation story, or they are reenacting the notion of interconnection between humanity, man and animal. Example of a story, buffalo calf. In this bundle is this sacred pipe. I need to get feathers to add to this. So in this bundle is a sacred pipe, which must always be treated in a holy way. No impure man or woman should see it. With the sacred pipe, you will send your voices to King Tonka, the great spirit. The bowl of the pipe is red stone, which represents the earth. A buffalo calf is carved in the stone, facing the center, symbolizing the four-legged creatures who live as brothers among it. The stem is wood and represents all growing things. 12 feathers hang from where the stem fits the bowl from the spotted eagle. These represent all the winged brothers who live among you. All these things are joined to you who will smoke the pipe and send voices. When you see this pipe and pray, you pray with, you pray for everything. The sacred pipe binds you to all your relatives, your grandfather and father, grandmother and mother. The red stone also represents the mother on earth on which you live. The earth is red, and the two-leggeds who live upon it are also red. King Tonkin has given you a red road, a good and straight road to travel. And you must remember that all people who stand on this earth are sacred. From this day, the sacred pipe will stand on the red earth, and you will send your voices. And there's actually a much longer description about all the things that go into the pipe that is mentioned by Buffalo Calf Woman. But the most basic idea is that everything that goes into the items used, the palm nuts and Ifa divination, the feathers, the wood, the bone, the clay that goes into the sacred pipe, that goes into flutes, that goes into these items, is sacred. So that when you play the drum or when you smoke from the pipe, everything that is part of that item is sending their prayers with you. Their spirit has joined you in this ritual. So the drum is a sacred thing. When the drum is beat, the cows are sending their prayers with you, if it's a cowhide drum, for instance. Other types of rituals that are mentioned in your book include things such as sand painting, chanting, the telling of sacred stories, vision quests and herbs that are used to promote different rituals. It mentions peyote, Native American church, the Church of Peyote. One thing that has become a problem that gets mentioned in this process that kind of bridges us as we move into the social is that misrepresentation. When other people who don't know the traditions decide to use it. There's a guy, Arizona, New Mexico, Arizona, back 20 years ago or so. And he thought these sweat lodges were really cool things. And you could make a lot of money doing sweat lodges. So we went and he got some plastic tarps and some tent stakes of various materials and some, just regular old coal that you would use, coal briskets used to have a fire, and you put them in the tent and would have people go in and sit for a couple hours. He didn't necessarily hydrate them properly either, which didn't help. And over 20 of them had health issues, some fainting, and even a few people died. He also well, caused a number of issues because he also, in the whole process, was stating how his process was better and easier and faster to experiencing some sense of the sacred than even the indigenous peoples of the region. So we have misappropriation, and truly we can call it misappropriation, and endangerment. Because there's a reason that when you actually have a traditional sweat lodge, it is made with the hides of animal skins. They breathe. Plastic is going to trap, and plastic that's heated is going to release toxins. They don't use charcoal, they use wood, and they use specific types of wood that are not going to be toxic. Also, the tent is going to have a hole so that the main parts of the smoke actually leave the sweat lodge and aren't trapped. It's not a tent per se. There's always plenty of fluid and hydration. And then there's also those ritual aspects of drumming usually and other things. People, and I'm not going to generalize which groups of people, but there are groups of people that are more prone to taking these rituals and trying to make them their own. There's also people who are going to sacred places, and this is actually mentioned in your textbook with regards to Mount Shasta. Does anyone remember what they read about Mount Shasta? What's happening? People go there, they think it's like this big spiritual sacred thing, and it is, except they're not treating it that way. They're playing loud music, leaving their water bottles and garbage behind, not respecting the land, but at the same time stating that they're these super spiritual people who went to this super spiritual place. Yet they're not actually respecting. It's one of the issues that many tribal groups around the world, but we see it especially here in the US, and Australia is seeing it with regards to like the Gagaju lands. You can now rent a cabin, go on an eco-tourism trip, and go to Hawk Dreaming and see all these places that were in that video. Gosh, I never. It'll cost you a penny, but you can do it. And they've had problems with pollution and trash being left behind and decreases in certain indigenous animal populations that for 40,000 years thrived with essentially no problems. Now they're disappearing. Sacred rockscapes that had paintings throughout them, people have come in and chipped away at some of them to try and take their piece of the sacred rock with them when they leave. The thing is, ecotourism is probably one of the least of the issues that indigenous groups have dealt with. I'll come back to Seattle, which is what I'm going to leave you with today. Who can tell me what is the ghost dance? You read your textbooks. You're supposed to read them over this past weekend. What is the ghost dance? If needed, I'll open up a discussion for our on-campus students, just like the discussion the online students are required to do. Can anybody tell me what the ghost dance is? Once, twice. All right, you are going to see an online discussion that you will be required to participate in, where you are asked to talk about the ghost dance, the Maji Maji Revolution, and the speech of Chief Seattle. So that's being added. You need to be able to read these books, and I need to know, because I like having the discussion in class, but if nobody's read, then nobody can answer the question, and we can't have a discussion. So,
Will you read this?
yeah, the textbook that you paid money for, and read the workbook. Yes. Yes.
I'm dead.
All right, Raj. Seriously though, I'm putting up a discussion and you will need, that's what attendance will come from, both in class today and it will come from doing that discussion.
Online discussion?
Mm-hmm. Because we could not have it in class. So, I will help you a little bit and we'll talk just a tiny bit about the speech of Chief Seattle. And I didn't bring that book with me. All right. So we're going to skim through part of it. I'm not going to read the entire thing. The son of the white chief says, his father sends us greetings of friendship and goodwill. This is kind, for we know he has little need of our friendship in return. His people are many. They are like the grass that covers the vast prairies, while my people, they resemble the scattering trees of a wind-swept plain. There was a time when our people covered the whole land as the waves of a wind-ruffled sea cover its shell-paved floor. But that time has long since passed away, with the greatness of tribes now almost forgotten. Your God loves your people, hates mine. He folds his strong arms lovingly around the white man and leads him as a father leads his infant son. But he has forsaken his red children. He makes your people wax strong every day, and soon they will fill this land, while my people are ebbing away like a fast receding tide that will never flow again. The white man's God cannot love his red children, or he would protect them. They seem to be orphans and can look nowhere for help. How can we become brothers? How can your father become our father and bring us prosperity? Your God seems to us to be partial. He came to the white man. We never saw him, never even heard his voice. He gave the white man laws, but had no word for his red children, whose teeming millions filled this vast continent as the stars filled the firmament. No, we are two distinct races and remain so. There is little in common between us. The ashes of our ancestors are sacred, and their final resting place is hallowed ground. While you wander away from the tombs of your fathers, seemingly without regret. Your religion was written on tablets of stone by the iron finger of an angry God, lest you forget. The red man could never remember nor comprehend. Our religion is the traditions of our ancestors, the dreams of our old men, the wisdom given them by the Great Spirit, the visions of our chiefs, and is written in the hearts of our people. Your dead cease to love you in the homes of their activity as soon as they pass the portals of the tomb. They wander far off beyond the stars, are soon forgotten and never return. Our dead never forget the beautiful world they gave them to. They still love its winding rivers, its great mountains, its sequestered vales, and they yearn in tenderest affection over the lonely-hearted living, and often return to visit and comfort them. Even the rock, every part of this country is sacred to my people. Every hillside, every valley, every plain and grove has been hallowed by some fond memory or some sad experience of my tribe. Even the rocks that seem to lie dumb as they swelter in the sun along the silent seashore in solemn grandeur thrill with memories of past events connected with the fate of my people. And the very dust under your feet responds more lovingly to our footsteps than to yours. It is the ashes of our ancestors, and our bare feet are conscious of the sympathetic touch, for the soil is rich with the life of our kindred. The same graves and fond mothers, glad-hearted maidens, and little children who lived and rejoiced here, and whose very names are now forgotten, still love these solitudes. And when the last red man shall have perished from the earth, and his memory among white men shall have become a myth, these shores shall swarm with the invisible dead of my tribe. And when your children's children think themselves alone, in the fields, the store, the shop, upon the highway, or in the silence of the woods, they will not be alone. In all the earth there is no place dedicated to solitude. At night, when the streets of your cities and villages shall be silent, and you think them deserted, they will throng with the returning hosts that once filled and still loved this beautiful land. The white man will never be alone. What do you think?
It was both a smack in the face and a hug.
What are your thoughts? Go on. I want to hear someone.
What do you want me to say?
What do you think?
About what?
What do you think of that? Raj, I'm calling you out more often now. I'm going to hold you to a higher level of accountability, just so you know. What do you think of the speech?
Or just don't talk, okay.
No, what do you think of the speech?
Great, I think.
You think red. Okay,
Great. I
great.
was writing a poem.
Why is it great?
Because
Well-
it's great.
It is a poem. You want a poem? You're writing a poem? I'll give you an example of a poem. It is a poem that is also a prayer. Earth, teach me quiet as the grasses are still with new life. Teach me suffering as old stones suffer with memory. Teach me humility as blossoms are humble with beginning. Teach me caring as mothers nurture their young. Teach me courage as the tree that stands alone. Teach me limitation as the ant that crawls on the ground. Teach me freedom as the eagle that soars in the sky. Teach me acceptance as the leaves that die each fall. Teach me renewal as the seed that rises in the spring. Teach me to forget myself as melted snow forgets its life. Teach me to remember kindness as dry fields weep with rain. So you can actually get insight, ideas about some of the poetry you want to write in class by actually listening in class.
Yeah.
I'm calling you out on this, and
Something
I'm
like
not
poems.
apologizing for
Diving
that.
into the depth of these things and cannot stop.
We do not want schools. They will teach us to have churches. We do not want churches. They will teach us to quarrel with that God. We do not want to learn that. We may quarrel with men sometimes about things on this earth, but we never quarrel about God. We do not want to learn that. Who's the red man?
Who's the red man? Oh, today I'm wearing red, so I'm red man.
Upon suffering, beyond suffering, the red nation shall rise again, and it shall be a blessing for a sick world, a world filled with broken promises, selfishness, and separations, a world longing for light again. I see a time of 7 generations when all the colors of mankind will gather under the sacred tree of life, and the whole earth will become one circle again. In that day there will be those among the Lakota who will carry knowledge and understanding of unity. All living things and the young white ones will come to those my people and ask for wisdom. I salute the light within your eyes where the whole universe dwells. For when you are at the center within you, and I am that place within me, we shall be one. One last one, because
They're on your
many
Facebook?
times, go on.
They're on your Facebook?
Yes. So you can locate them
Yeah.
easily. One of the harshest things in American history with tribal religions is the forced removal of them, the forced move west. And the interesting thing is many of the tribal groups didn't have a problem with the itinerant missionaries of the Baptist church or of the Methodist Church. These churches tended to actually go on the Trail of Tears with many of them. But the thing is, while they could understand and they found the text to be good, they questioned it. Well, the Bible, seems to be a good book. Strange that white man isn't better for having had it so long. This idea that they weren't trying to completely say no to all the ideas that were being presented by the groups coming in. It was that the groups coming in told them what to do. In the Gagaju video, the Balinda, the white man came. And what did the white man do? Didn't want to share the land per se. He wanted to take it and tell the indigenous people what to do. Tribal religions tend to get along with other tribal religions. Tribal religions tend to get along with mainstream world religions, so long as those other groups do not try to tell them what to do. You keep your life, I keep my life. I want to learn about your life. I want you to learn about my life. Just don't tell me that my life should be yours. And I won't tell you your life should be mine. It's not that tribal groups didn't fight. Oh, there were wars. There have been wars between different tribes of Africa. The Fawn and the Yoruba have not always gotten along with the Dogon and the Pygmies. The Iroquois and the Cherokee and the Lakota and the Sioux, they didn't always have peace. But they didn't fight over Wankantonka. The Gagaju and the other tribes didn't fight about saying whether it was the snake or Ginga the crocodile that formed the rock country. They fought over resources, yes, but not over what was sacred. And so, when you read about the Maji Maji Revolution, which you will read about before we get to the next time we touch on tribal religions, when you read about the ghost dance, think about why these revolutions were taking place. Why were the Sioux doing the ghost dance? And these events, these problems are still taking place. It wasn't until, some will say the 1980s, but for the most part, it wasn't until the 1970s that the Australians really began to recognize that Indigenous people could take care of their own children. Even in the 70s, there were laws in place that allowed for Indigenous children to be taken away so that they would be raised properly. There are places in Libya, in different parts of Eastern Africa where, who is the actor? Some Hollywood couple a few years ago wanted to adopt an orphan from one of the orphanages there in Western Africa.
Was Angela Jolie appropriate?
No, it wasn't that. Because most of the ones that they've tried to adopt seem to be orphans. It's a different couple. They went and they found out the kid's parents lived 2 miles away. In fact, the kid's parents were still together 2 miles away. But the parents couldn't afford to provide what was suggested as proper education, proper shelter, proper care. So they were advised, it was suggested, there was pressure for them to just take their children to the orphanage. Because it's guaranteed if the children are part of the orphanage, they'll get food, shelter, some degree of an education. It's happening to a lot of different parts of Africa. It's happening in some areas down in Honduras and a few other regions where it's seen as a good thing to not keep your kids sometimes because the view is that you wouldn't be able to properly take care of it. And sometimes that's the case. Sometimes the groups do need food or access to education. But what's happening instead of that is children being taken away. So think about that. These events that are described and why the Maji Maji Revolution took place, why the ghost dance took place, they haven't completely disappeared. And people such as the Sioux are still fighting for the right to actually use the land that they've been given over and over and over again in treaty after treaty. Does anybody know about the Dakota Pipeline? As an example,
Sounds-
the idea of putting an oil pipeline across native lands and specifically across rivers in order to get the oil down into different parts of the U.S. Oh, and there have already been oil spills. All right, so please make sure you do that. I will put up on Canvas the information that Viraj is actually going to give us about Florida Mindfulness Community, and he's going to be he's going to practice mindfulness more in class. We'll ask him to describe what it is. All right, for next week, 1, I will be putting the tribal religion quiz up. You should be able to pass, no problem. It's not going to go into super detail. By the time we get past the midpoint of the term and we come back around to looking at tribal religions again, I really expect better ability to discuss this topic. Number 2, the discussion for on-campus students is going up online. You will have participated in it just like what I have my online students do. 3, next week we start Hinduism. What do you think that means you need to do? Read the chapter on Hinduism, watch the required video. I might end up doing a small pop quiz as part of attendance and engagement on Tuesday to make sure that you have read your text. I really don't like doing pop quizzes because then I have to grade them. However, I think that might be needed in order to make sure you understand here at the beginning of the semester you actually need to read your pop quiz. All right, I will see you next class.
Yeah.